Hey guys, welcome back to another Star Wars video. So I'm actually really excited to share this with you because there's a new clip that I've never seen before. It's from 2014 and it reveals George Lucas's vision for how Star Wars going forward was going to handle Mandalorian culture and how they would end up appearing in the Clone Wars, in Rebels, and the Mandalorian TV show. How George influenced Dave Filoni by giving him his opinion on what Mando should be like. Now, one of the reasons this is such a crucial update is it finally puts to bed a long-standing debate in the Star Wars fandom. There is an enormous divide between old-school Mandalorian fans, so fans of the expanded universe Mandos from the comics, from KOTOR, and those who are more recent Mando fans. And all of this can be boiled down to one specific author, Karen Traviss, who, by the way, is one of the greatest ever Star Wars Legends authors. And she really laid down the law of what Mando culture was before the Disney acquisition and before their on-screen depiction in 3D Clone Wars and all of the content that came after. And fans of her work insist that Dave Filoni changed all of that he watered down the Mandos, made them too pacifistic, and changed fundamentally the warrior culture that we read about in the Republic Commando series. But it turns out, my friends, in a clip that's resurfaced for the first time in 11 years, Dave Filoni says, "We looked at what they did in the EU, and George didn't like it. He didn't like how simplistic and tribal the Mandalorians were. He wanted to make them more refined, and George wanted to show, through characters like Duchess Satine, that Mandalorians could move beyond their past, learning from the mistakes of the days where they were just brutal warriors, and adapt to a changing galaxy. And to make things worse, the clans who resembled the old Mandos, the warrior clans trying to bring back the old ways, were branded as extremists. For instance, Death Watch. And of course, in canon, post-Clone Wars Mandalorian culture became fragmented, but fans who blame Dave Filoni should actually look to George Lucas. Take a listen to this resurfaced clip.
In the EU, there's been a lot of stories, of course, written about Mandalorians all the time. And as I went over when we attacked it in Clone Wars, and that material was brought to the attention of the maker, he was like, yeah, that's interesting, but that's not what I intended here. And, George just has a very big view of culture. And if you look at, like certain cultures and they change over the years, sometimes people are warlike and then later they become very pacifistic as a reaction to that warrior ideals. But then sometimes you can't fight the nature of things, or you can't fight your own history, and it returns. And I think that he just wanted to tell a bigger, more sweeping tale in that than rather just, have these Mandalorians, which in some way in the EU basically are just the Star Wars version of Klingons, really. Just warriors that don't seem to have any real technological know-how or, frankly, discipline, which, to be a more successful warrior, you actually need quite a bit of. George's vision and in our discussions, we decided to have the Mandalorians be, much more technologically based, much more sweeping as far as their designs of military weapons, much more almost with an Aryan mindset based on World War II Nazis and how they developed such intense technologies in a very short period of time, combating Jedi over the years, and how they were creating weapons that mimicked a lot of things that they saw the Jedi have, but abilities they didn't have directly.
Now, it should be said, both in the expanded universe and in canon, Mandos have a long, complicated history, and I don't think George was trying to eradicate the older lore as much as he was trying to alter the Clone Wars era Mandos. And in Disney canon, there is an event that changed everything: the Jedi-Mandalorian War. In the expanded universe, the equivalent would be the Mandalorian Excision. 700 years before the Clone Wars, Mandalorians got too big for their britches, and the Jedi handed them their worst defeat since Malachor V. And this is what inspired some Mandos to try a new system of government, and this is what George Lucas is talking about. But there are some other key differences. For instance, in the EU, any species could become a Mandalorian. I mean, they literally descended from a race called the Tong. But in the Clone Wars, it seems that Mandos had a big problem with outsiders. I suppose Grogu does change things a bit further down the timeline, but during the Clone Wars era, this is a key distinction. Something else George Lucas got rid of was the Ku Valdar. Essentially, in the Republic Commando series, there were Mandalorians selected by Jango Fett to train the clones. They served as instructors to the Army of the Republic. But look, with all of these differences, even back in the expanded universe days, the lore was complex and spanned many generations, different denominations and factions. Mando culture was not monolithic. George Lucas wanted Mandalorians to be more than just badass warriors. He wanted them to reflect the consequences of violence, war, and past ideology. But notice that Dave talks about technology being at the center of this change. How every battle made the Mandalorians reflect on how they were doing combat, and they evolved technologies very quickly, and he compares it to a certain group from World War II. Now this has confused fans. They're saying, hang on a minute, if George wanted to make them more pacifistic, learn from their past, how can he also, in the same breath, compare them to such a hateful movement? Well, honestly, when he brings up that group, he's not talking about their morality. I just think he's talking about their ability to adapt with new technology, ones that are designed to fight their enemies. And I guess what George didn't like about Karen Travis's ideas of Mandalorians is that they were glorifying war. George believed instead of living for war, they should learn from it. And he liked the idea of them still being badasses, but as inventors and tacticians, a society that developed advanced armor, jetpacks, and gadgets to survive alongside the Jedi. But it should be noted, Karen Travis's Mandos also had a lot of nuance. They were warriors, but they still had ethics. There was a code of honor, and while they loved their weapons, she framed their approach as virtuous. But George felt that her work was romanticizing war. And here's the thing, between the Clone Wars, Rebels, and the Mandalorian TV show, recent canon has cherry-picked some of Karen Travis's ideas. Mandalorians were a tight-knit, honor-based, multicultural warrior society. Anyone could become a Mando if they adopted the Mandoad, which is their culture. She expanded their rich language, Mandoa, which we hear in the Book of Boba Fett, by the way. She explored their traditions and philosophy centered on family, adoption, their code, and loyalty. And her books portrayed them as competent, pragmatic soldiers who viewed themselves as morally superior to the corrupt Jedi and the Republic. And the reason so many fans resonated with this concept of Mandos was because it felt like a Spartan meets nomad culture. Many fans grew attached to the deep, lived-in, humanizing Mandalorian society. Let me read you this. This is an excerpt from her book, 000, and it encompasses most of what she believed Mandalorians to be. She says, quote, Mandalorians are surprisingly unconcerned with biological lineage. Their definition of offspring or parent is more by relationship than birth. Adoption is extremely common, and it's not unusual for soldiers to take war orphans as their sons or daughters if they impress them with their aggression and tenacity. And it's this very aggression that George rejected. She goes on to say, they value their culture, loyalty, strong self-identity, emphasis on physical endurance, and discipline. But they are a family-oriented warrior population. So as you can see from this paragraph, it kind of reminds me of the Children of the Watch when they talk about adoption from other tribes, from other cultures. But the biggest similarity that I see, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, is a faith-like devotion. In Karen Travis's case, based on the 6 core Mandalorian tenets, the Resolnare, and in Disney canon, the Way. And one of the biggest things to have come out of this lore change was the Darksaber. Originally, before the story of Tarl Vista, Dave Filoni envisioned a sword that the Mandalorians created to go up against the Jedi. He came up with a vibro sword, but George Lucas hated this idea. He didn't think a metal sword stood a chance, so then Filoni changed it from a sword to a lightsaber and altered its origin story. But I would love to know what you guys think. Share your thoughts in the comments down below.